And what the Pel is up, everybody? This is Pelicans Plus with Elliot Clough at Elliot Clough on Twitter. And today we are joined by Harrison Wind of the Denver Nuggets podcast, DNVR. Before we get started, to talk a little bit about Paul Millsap and what he might be able to bring to the Pelicans. Just a reminder that this episode is brought to you in part by Hornitos. Hornitos, the official tequila of Pelicans Plus and Boot Crew Media. Also, make sure you subscribe, drop a comment, etc. Also subscribe on Apple Podcasts and all that as well. Harrison, appreciate you taking the time. I DM'd you yesterday, and here we are today doing the pod. So quick turnaround. We really appreciate it. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I only agreed to do this podcast because it has such a good name. Just full disclosure. It's the only reason. No, I'm just kidding.
I appreciate it. I mean, most of the time I get a hard time about saying what the Pel is up to start every podcast, but hey, I'll take that too. So here we are to talk a little bit about Millsap. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you're feeling about the Nuggets coming into this season. They lost 4-1 to the Suns in the semis, or was it a sweep?
Oh, they got swept. Suns in 4. You never heard of it?
Yeah. So they got swept in that second round. They're coming back this coming year. Drafted Bones Highland. Won't have Jamal Murray, at least initially, after that ACL tear. How you feeling about your Nuggets coming around as the season's going to start in a couple months here?
I feel like I should be feeling uneasy about the Nuggets because Jamal Murray is going to be out for this first large chunk of the season. But actually, I'm feeling okay about the Nuggets. I think they're going to be fine. They proved at the end of last regular season that they can win without Murray, and they've got a really, really deep team. They've got the reigning MVP. They know the style. They know the brand of basketball that they play. They got a lot of continuity. They got a really good coach. So it feels like there should be some panic just because when you lose a player like Jamal Murray for this long, it feels like all your plans should go out the window and you kind of need to start over. But that's not the sense that I'm getting with Denver. They obviously don't have nearly the ceiling that they have with Jamal Murray, but in a regular season environment, and I mean the questions of how is Jamal Murray going to be when he gets back for the playoffs, like we don't know all that stuff, but for the regular season, I feel like they're going to be okay.
Okay. Are you on the hype train of Michael Porter Jr. maybe being MIP? I know that was a conversation last year, and a lot of people really love his game. Are you high on Michael Porter Jr.?
Oh, I'm super high on Michael Porter Jr. I mean, statistically, he was arguably the best shooter in the NBA last season. He put up an offensive season that very few people of his age, very few 22-year-olds ever have. So I think the sky's the limit for him, and it's going to be fascinating to see what he does at the beginning of the season without Jamal Murray. Because if Michael Porter Jr. came out and averaged 25 a game right out of the gate, I wouldn't be surprised. And I don't think a lot of people in Denver would be surprised. So he's going to have a big opportunity to really prove what he can do with Jamal out alongside Nikola Jokic. So that's the biggest storyline for Denver. It's really that storyline's number one. And then there's a big chunk between like the next key storyline because a lot of this season is about Michael Porter's development.
It's easy to say now, in retrospect, but I personally absolutely loved the pick when they took him however many years ago. But obviously a high-end guy who would have been probably top 5 in that class, if not maybe even top 3. But yeah, anyway, we're here to talk about Paul Millsap today because there was an article coming from Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report talking about the Pelicans having some interest in Paul Millsap. Obviously right now the Pels roster is completely full. They'd have to cut somebody. It looks like they're going to have to cut Wenyen Gabriel anyway. And for those of you who listen to the Pelicans Plus podcast, you know that I am a Wenyen Gabriel stan, so that hurts my heart. But if it is a possibility for them to bring him in, it's probably going to be at the deadline. Somebody gets hurt, something like that. And if the Pelicans are really good, it's a possibility he could come in and help out in the playoff push later on in the season. But what did he offer the Nuggets this last year? I mean, he played 20 minutes, which isn't a ton, but enough to make an impact. The 3-point shooting wasn't quite there. What did he offer the Nuggets this last year in this last season?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because this last season that he had with Denver was definitely his worst, by far his worst, I thought, of the four that he spent with the Nuggets. And I mean, when Paul Millsap got to Denver, I've said this before, but he was the right guy, the perfect guy at the right time for the team that Denver had. Denver was super young. They were really inexperienced. They honestly just didn't really know how to win. And they had never been to the playoffs. Paul Millsap came here and had, more playoff experience than the entire roster combined in terms of just playoff games. And he just brought a professionalism, a maturity, a defensive focus that the Nuggets had not had in the Jokic era so far. I mean, before Paul Millsap got here, the Nuggets were one of the worst defenses in the league. His second year here, they were top 10 in defense. They don't do that. They don't even scratch that if it's not for Paul Millsap. So he made a huge impact early on in his Nuggets tenure. These last couple of years, he definitely shifted into more of a secondary role. He came off the bench last year. He was really the fourth big. And the big takeaway from last year is he kind of wore down as the season went on. So when you were saying, maybe he looks to sign on with the team at the midway point of the season, I actually kind of like that idea for him because he's got a less chance of wearing down.
That makes sense. Now, do you think should he join a team, not necessarily the Pelicans, but should he join a team like, I don't know, the Nets or the Warriors at this point early on in the season? Does he still have value for the entirety of the season, or would you more prefer halfway through and he gets a little bit of rest, recuperation time to really make a push for the playoffs and still be impactful in the playoffs?
He averaged 21 minutes per game last year. So if he went to a Brooklyn, if he went to a Golden State and averaged, 10 minutes a game, 15 minutes a game, maybe some nights he was in the rotation, some nights he wasn't in the rotation, I think he could last an entire season that way and still be really ready for the playoffs. And I think from what I know about Paul, from what I've talked to him about over the years, that seems like a situation that he would be more interested in, just going to a bona fide contender where he can, carve out a role off the bench. He can be that veteran guy. The Pelicans, to me, seem like kind of in a similar situation to what the Nuggets were in when Paul Millsap went to Denver 4 years ago. So I don't know if he wants to, take on a team and be around a bunch of young guys and play that just veteran influence and set the tone day in, day out. I feel like he would most likely want to latch on to more of a contender.
Yeah, and that's what I think a lot of people are presuming as well. There are a few comments. I don't know if you can see them, and I hope you are only momentarily oh, there you are. You're back. Okay, you're frozen for a second. But there are a few comments, and a lot of people don't think it's a real possibility. But, I mean, Jake Fisher doesn't put out stuff that isn't legit. So the thing about that is I really do believe it would be that second option where he would come in, midway through the season if somebody gets hurt who's of import. There are a few weaknesses still with this roster, obviously with the Pelicans. They could use probably that third star, or at least a tertiary playmaker. The point guard position, it's really fluid right now. The backcourt was really iffy last year, especially with Eric Bledsoe and Lonzo. And then the front court, what is it going to look like with Valanciunas, Billy Hernangomez, Jackson Hayes? Who's another four? Is it Zion at the four? There's a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces. And I think Millsap would be really awesome in terms of a complementary role should he come in at some point in time like that. Now, what would he be on this Pelicans roster, do you think? Is he still able to be a point of attack defender? Is he more just a help guy? Does he have the wherewithal and the athletic ability still to guard some of the better players in the NBA?
I mean, defensively, he's definitely lost a step. He's definitely not as quick as he was even a couple of years ago, but he's still going to be a really sound team defender. I'm not too versed on the Pelicans. I know you guys just got Jonas Valanciunas, but if Paul Millsap was there, knowing how young that Pelicans team is, he's going to be one of your better team defenders right off the bat, even though he is up there in age and has lost a step. He just knows how to play defense. He knows how to play team defense. He's a super high IQ defender. So, he's not going to be able to stop guys on the perimeter, smaller guards like he was in the past. In the post, rebounding, he's still going to be solid there in a regular season environment, especially. And then on the offensive end of the floor, his percentages were obviously down last year. One of the things that he changed about his game when he got to Denver, he looked around and saw Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and then over these last couple of years, Michael Porter. He knew he was going to get a lot of wide open threes. So he had some of his best shooting seasons over the last couple of years. He was down a little last year to 34%, but 43% 2 years ago, 36.5% last year. So he can be a reliable shooter if he's taking catch and shoot, step in threes. Otherwise, on the offensive end, he's going to be a real fourth option type of guy. He does have some success in the mid post. He has such an old man's game, like an old YMCA game where he gets younger guys, he gets defenders on little tic-tac fouls, shooting fouls. He gets some crazy and ones that way. He finds a way to score if you go to him in the post, but you definitely don't want to be running your offense through him.
Now, a couple questions from that. You mentioned Jonas Valanciunas, who really isn't gonna do a whole lot for the Pelicans in terms of defense, maybe a little rim protection, but it's gonna be a lot of drop coverage is what's gonna happen. So I'm not looking forward to that. Is that what you expect or what you saw from Millsap as well in the pick and roll defense last year? Is he now a drop coverage guy because he has lost that step?
Potentially. I mean, the Nuggets mixed it up a lot last year. With Jokic, they like to play up at the level of the ball, and Millsap played that role also on the bench unit. So he did that last year. So I don't think he has to be exclusively a drop guy. Like I said, he's lost a step, but he's still, pretty quick, all things considered, for a 36-year-old. He knows where to be. He knows how to move on the defensive end of the floor. He knows how to cover every type of pick and roll. So I wouldn't say exclusively drop. I wouldn't say exclusively that.
Okay. And a lot of people myself included, are saying, man, the Pels need a switchable big. And that Millsap, that's where he comes in the conversation typically.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's 100% switchable. Maybe a couple of years ago, he was definitely more switchable, but he can hold his own against certain guys. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I was, if that was my base defense with him, switching everything. I would not feel comfortable with that. Against certain matchups, he could hold his own on a switch.
All right, noted. And the other thing that you said that's super encouraging about the defense is he's a great team defender. And the Pelicans, my God, they need that so bad. Zion, I don't know how much you got to watch of the Pelicans, other than maybe when they played the Nuggets last year. But Zion and Brandon Ingram were just atrocious on the defensive end. Zion got better. I'm convinced he was just, rebelling against Stan Van Gundy, which, more power to you, whatever.
I think that's a good theory, actually.
Yeah. The team defense was pretty bad at times. Obviously, individuals got a lot better. Jackson Hayes got a lot better. Nikhil Alexander-Walker was really awesome on the perimeter. But having a team defense guy like Millsap would be really beneficial for this roster. And then you mentioned the shooting. And obviously those minutes, that was the fewest minutes he's played since his rookie year. Last season. And then the shooting, like you said, he took that almost a 10% dip in 3-point shooting. What would you attribute that to? Was it just kind of a fluke? Is it the fact that Jamal Murray was out and there wasn't as much space? What's going on there?
I would attribute it a lot to the fact that, he was a starter. Paul Millsap was really since he signed in Denver. Last season, he kind of split time. He started the year as a starter. Then when Aaron Gordon got here, he obviously switched to the bench. So this isn't all of it, but I think some of it is he went from playing alongside Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, and Michael Porter, where he was getting a lot of really in rhythm, wide open threes, to playing with a bench unit that honestly, it was a bit chaotic in terms of just the offense that they ran. on that Nuggets second unit. It was not, the beautiful 2-man game into a Jokic MPJ dribble handoff that winds up in Millsap's hands for a wide open wing three. It was not that pretty with Denver's bench. So I can attribute some of that to that. And, maybe the 43.5% that he shot 2 years ago, probably a bit of an outlier. He's probably more of, the 36% type of guy, 37% type of guy that he was the year before.
Yeah, and that was the only year he's been above 40% in terms of three-point shooting. Obviously, those playing with excellent players like that definitely helps. And Zion, I don't know how much you watch, but or any tape or highlights you've seen.
Oh, I watched the Pelicans score 80 points in the paint one game against the Nuggets last year. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
But I just watched highlights last night, and I think there was one where he scored in the paint against the Bucks, and there were literally 4 Bucks in the paint with him, and Steven Adams was right there, and then all the Pels were on the 3-point line. So literally any form of 3-point shooting would be huge for this Pels team. And so I think the Pels would really, really benefit from a guy like that for a lot of reasons. Now, you mentioned the veteran presence too. Is there anything you can necessarily point to where you've heard a player give Millsap credit for an improvement they made, or you've noticed where he was sort of mentoring a player or anything like that?
I mean, this is, I feel like the most value he would bring to the Pelicans is in this respect. Honestly, it seems like a similar situation New Orleans does to the situation he came into in Denver. And there's a story from Millsap's first year here. He tore some ligaments in his wrist, a freak injury, but missed a big chunk of the season, the middle chunk of the season, comes back. And his first week or so back, Nikola Jokic is just deferring to him. He's trying to set Millsap up. Jokic isn't looking for his shot. Jokic is trying to center the offense around Millsap, and Nikola Jokic had a lot of respect for Paul Millsap when he got here. Like, Millsap was a multi-time All-Star, all the playoff experience. Jokic didn't have any of that back in 2017, so he had a lot of respect for him. And Paul Millsap pretty much just went to him in March after a game and was like, dude, you're the franchise. You're the focus of this offense. Stop trying to run everything through me. Like, you're our guy. And I really feel like that was a big moment in just kind of the Jokic arc and over these last couple of years in the Jokic era. I think Jokic gets to where he is now, maybe without Millsap, but I think that was a big event that kind of pushed him forward and saying, I am the guy. Here's this 3-time All-Star being like, I'm the center of the offense. I'm the franchise. I'm the guy here. So it's stuff like that he's done over the years. And he's not a rah-rah guy. He's a lead by example type guy. But that's what Denver needed. They needed a guy who was a professional, who had been in the playoff battles, who had won playoff games, who had played on really good teams to kind of show them how to win and instill a defensive first mindset. I really feel like that would be where his most value would be to the Pelicans and even to Zion. I think he'd be great for Zion.
That especially, I would love to see that relationship kind of grow. And we've obviously seen, Zion was awesome as a rookie. He was even better as a sophomore. So I think Zion is definitely a guy who is willing to learn and grow. And I would love to see a relationship between Paul Millsap and Jackson Hayes, and Paul Millsap and Trey Murphy. I don't know. That was the first thing that stuck out to me. Not Zion, believe it or not, which is, I don't know. I cover the Pelicans, like you'd think. I don't know. Anyway, I love Trey Murphy, everything we've seen from him, and he's mentioned he wants to be coachable, so that's probably why. But I'm a big fan of Murphy, and I think he would see Millsap and be like, "Oh my God, teach me everything you have." So that's where I lie on that. Now, in terms of the Nuggets deciding not to bring him back, what was the ultimate factor that led them to not, bring him back to Denver? Is it the fact that they have JaMychal Green? Is it the fact that they just don't see him contributing coming into this coming year?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that they wanted to bring JaMychal Green back. He was a bigger priority than Paul Millsap. He's just a better player, I feel like, than Paul Millsap at this point. He's younger. He's more durable. And then they signed Jeff Green, who's going to be on that backup bench unit next to JaMychal Green and pretty much take Paul Millsap's spot. And, after that, the roster was pretty much filled up. But, I don't know if Paul would want to come back to an environment where he's the fifth big behind four really capable front court guys. I mean, all those four guys are good players that he'd be behind: Nikola Jokic, Aaron Gordon, JaMychal Green, and Jeff Green. I think he's clearly the fifth guy there. So that was part of it. And then, I just felt like it was time. It was time for, Denver to move on there. Like Michael Malone was a huge Paul Millsap guy, and you can see why. Like, Paul Millsap was great defensively. He helped instill the culture here on a really young team. But, after 4 years, it just seemed like it was time to move on. And the roster moves, the Jeff Green move kind of helped that happen, I think.
Sure. And lastly, before we move on to the final question of today's pod, to sort of transition there, if I had to guess, honestly, like I wanted to do this podcast because I'm a big Paul Millsap guy, and obviously this is our second time talking with Harrison, and crushed it last year on the Drew Holiday trade series. But the last thing I'll say is if I had to guess, Millsap is probably going to go to the Nets or the Warriors. I see it in that sort of David West role that he had with the Warriors over those championship years. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say it's most likely. I think if he had it his way, like, he would have been a contributor on a contending team in Denver. He really wanted to get over the top and win a championship in Denver. That would have been his first goal. But I've got to think, at this point in his career, he wants a ring. He wants to be on a contender. So I think him winding up with one of those contenders is most likely end game.
I'm right there with you. If he ends up with the Pels at, halfway through the season, I'll be all for it. And I'm sure we'll talk again should that happen. But the last thing that we'll talk about on today's pod, outsider's perspective. We're kind of in an echo chamber.
We are,
right now. Yeah. Everybody's positive and feeling really good about this coming season. Well, maybe not everybody, especially if you're a Rockets or Thunder fan, but Harrison, for an outsider's perspective, what are you thinking about the Pelicans going into this coming season?
Man,
Very broad question.
I've just been baffled by a lot of the moves that the Pelicans have made over the last couple of years, starting with Stan Van Gundy. I mean, that hire just made no sense to me when it happened. And like, you have to cut bait after 1 year, and you have to owe him a lot of money if it really just doesn't work like it didn't. And then, with the point guard situation, man, it seems like they got choice D out of all the point guards that they were rumored, or at least they had leaked that they think they could have gotten. And so I don't think that was handled great. But look, man, in my outsider's perspective on the Pelicans is the first half of the season is going to be really stressful and really strenuous on everybody, because you got the Zion question and you've got to get out to a good start, I think, if you're New Orleans to keep him happy. I mean, I think it just really comes down to that.
Yeah. I think that narrative is just so drastically pushed on this team, like they're not talking about him scoring 27 points a game as a rookie and shooting, or a rookie as a second-year player and shooting at 61% from the field. And nobody's talking about De'Aaron Fox leaving the Kings. Nobody's talking about Ja Morant leaving the Grizzlies. Especially the Grizzlies have had the strangest offseason I have seen for any team. The Pelicans have been listed as the worst offseason throughout the league by different media outlets. I'm like, are you even? It's in the same division. Like, it just drives me nuts. What would you say it was a positive? I think they're better. I mean, again, echo chamber. But do you, from the outside perspective, do you think they got better, even by addition, by subtraction?
I think they stayed about stagnant. I mean, I'm a Lonzo Ball guy. We're Lonzo Ball guys in Denver, so I'm a big Lonzo fan. Like, I feel like he's exactly the type of guy you want around Zion. Um, and like Devonte Graham is good. He can put the ball in the hoop. Um, I don't know. I'd say they probably stayed about the same. The Valanciunas thing is an upgrade, I think. But like, is it going to really tilt the needle? I'd say no. Sorry, I'm such a downer, but
Well, in terms of the Lonzo Ball conversation, because this is all stuff we've talked about for a while.
Sure.
But the Lonzo Ball thing, like in theory, absolutely perfect for Zion in theory, but the dude just cannot operate in the half court. Like, and there's a reason he was really shifted into a 3-and-D position last year, the situation last year. And so I just put out a podcast where I said Lonzo Ball isn't as good as people think he is, and the Chicago Bulls would be disappointed. That was the name of it, and the amount of hate that I got on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all that was a lot. So if you haven't heard about Lonzo stands, they're awful.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared for that response to my Lonzo take, but I should have been. I should have listened to your pod.
Yeah, right. There you go. Hey, if you want to find it, I could shoot you the link, but it's on YouTube, Pelicans Plus, all that. Anyway, Harrison, appreciate you joining us. Before we go today, again, folks, Hornitos, official tequila of the Pelicans Plus podcast and Boot Crew Media. Subscribe, drop a comment, leave a rate and review, all that, like, etc., and especially subscribe on YouTube. So, Harrison, once again, thanks so much for joining us today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.